Hey guys, tonight we're climbing high into the clouds where the air's so thin it whistles through your teeth and the wind tastes like stone and sky. You're standing on a slope of the Andes boots sunken in centuries-old moss, surrounded by nothing but the slow rustle of wool. Not in your blanket, not in your sweater. No, you're about to meet hundreds of warm, blinking, fluffy sheep, and not one of them is being counted with numbers. See, in this world, numbers aren't really a thing. You don't say 21 sheep. You say that beige one who follows the one with the limp, and 3 behind the one who eats grass with his left side of the mouth. It's a different kind of knowing part, visual part instinct, and part magic. And, let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive this job. The slopes are steep, the rains are cold, and if one sheep wanders off, it could fall into a crevice so deep it forgets its own name. But the locals, the herders, they walk these paths like they're made of silk. Notebooks, nope. Counting apps, don't be ridiculous. And still, they always know if one is missing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to hear where you're listening from and what time it is where you're. Drop it in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You hoist a hand-woven poncho over your shoulders and take your first step upward into this quiet, uncounted world. The wind nudges you gently uphill as if the mountain itself wants to show you something. Above you, the clouds roll across the jagged peaks like fog trying to remember where it left its keys. Below, the terraces spiral downward in a hypnotic quilt of maize potatoes and sleeping rocks. And then you hear them, the sheep. Or more precisely, the llamas, alpacas, and yes, some curly-haired native sheep with heads like fuzzy dandelions. They make no effort to run. They just exist calmly and in great numbers. But how many? You have no clue. The herder beside you, a small figure with a weather-worn face and fingers that look like twisted tree roots, clicks her tongue. The flock begins to move, gently nudging each other along an invisible path. You open your mouth to ask how many there are, but she's already smiling. "We don't need to count," she says, patting the side of her head. "I remember them all by feel." It turns out that here in these heights, where air and time get thin, memory works differently. Instead of numbers, the herders remember patterns. Who walks where, who stops to scratch their nose at which rock, who fights over which patch of moss. The animals are less a collection of individuals and more a constantly moving landscape like a living river of wool. 100 sheep, 1,000 maybe. But what matters is the shape of the flock, the flow of their gait, the rhythm of their chewing. One out of place, and a herder feels it like a missing tooth. And that's not even the weird part, because these herders don't just remember their sheep, they remember your sheep too, and your cousins. And your cousin's cousin's half-lame, half-albino goat, and where it was last month, and what color thread they tied around its left ear in the summer of that weird hailstorm. It's a kind of tracking system that lives in people instead of in books. A slow, steady web of knowledge passed through stories, jokes, and the occasional shrug. Historians still argue whether this was intentional brilliance or just what happens when you've got 0 spreadsheets and way too much wool. Some even think it wasn't about sheep at all, that this whole non-counting system was a way of protecting sacred knowledge, hiding it from invaders or even jealous neighbors. One thing's for sure, it works. And you trudging uphill in a borrowed poncho and half-frozen boots are beginning to suspect that your phone calculator might not be the superior tool you thought it was. As you reach a narrow ridge, the clouds part just a little. The herder points to a stone shelter nestled into the mountainside. From here, she says you'll learn the rest, not by looking, but by listening. To the sheep, to the wool, to the mountain. You raise your eyebrows, but she's already gone, moving with her flock like a shadow. And you're left at the edge of a cloud, wondering what kind of world doesn't need numbers to keep track of what matters most. The wind coils around your ankles as you step into the shelter, ducking beneath a stone lintel barely high enough for your head. Inside, it smells of sheep oil smoke and something sweet, maybe roasted maize. There's no door, just a thick alpaca fiber curtain that sways behind you like it's got secrets to share. On the far wall hangs a belt. No, not a belt. Not really. It's wide and stiff and covered in tight geometric bands of color reds, like mountain berries golds, like highland clay blues, stolen from the sky itself. Each pattern repeats in odd little stutters. Some sections ripple like fish scales, others tighten into fists of knotted threads. You're looking at a quipu's cousin, a woven band that doesn't just hold up pants, but entire histories. The Andean weavers called them tokapus, and to them this wasn't just fabric. It was a language. Every line, every color, every symbol holds meaning. But the weird part is no one's totally sure what that meaning is. Historians still argue whether these patterns represent place names, clan affiliations, or inventory checklists. Some even suggest they recorded stories like comic strips. But out here, among herders and weavers, no one doubts the belt knows things. The woman sitting beside the loom gray braids like ropes slung over her shoulder winks at you. She's been watching you squint. "It's not for your eyes," she says, tapping the side of her temple. "It's for your head." She pulls another cloth from her lap, folds it, and hands it to you. It's simpler just a narrow sash cream with 2 deep red stripes. "Put it on," she says. "Left side first." You obey, not wanting to offend someone who probably knows 5 different ways to tan a puma. As the cloth rests against your body, you feel something unexpected, a shift in posture, a grounding. You're not just wearing the sash, you're being worn by it. The way it crosses your shoulder feels directional, like it's pointing somewhere. Is it functional? "You'll feel it when the animals change," she mutters, turning back to her loom. The weavers of the Andes didn't need numbers to organize their world. They wove data straight into their clothes. A belt could tell you who made it, what village they came from, what festival was coming up, how many people had died that year, and, oh yeah, exactly which sheep had just given birth to twins. You feel a sudden foolish panic. Is this sash talking about you? But before you can examine it for passive-aggressive alpaca gossip, the weaver beckons you closer. She points to a section on her loom that looks off. The colors are wrong. The pattern skips. A stripe turns into a triangle and then just stops. That, she says, is a warning. You lean in. In the old days, she continues, if a disease swept through the flocks, or if a puma took too many lambs, we'd change the pattern. Then anyone who saw the cloth would feel what we'd felt. Not with words, not with math, but right here. She thumps her chest once. Quirky fact time, one surviving Tokapu fragment has a bright pink zigzag over black and gold squares. Some archaeologists think it marks the day of a solar eclipse, and maybe even the exact village that panicked so much they sacrificed 5 guinea pigs just in case. Accurate, unclear. Delightfully dramatic, absolutely. Your hand hovers over the sash again. Is it telling your story now? Outside, you hear the bleating start up again. The flock's on the move. You step to the doorway just in time to see them funnel down a narrow ridge. There's no count, just movement. One long ribbon of hooves and ears and silence. You watch fascinated as they curve around a rock outcrop like water curling in a stream. And then one stops. It doesn't run, doesn't cry, just pauses. Like a skipped beat in a song. And your body tenses before you even know why. The weaver stands beside you. See, you feel it. She doesn't count. She doesn't whistle. She just waves her hand and the animal moves on. It clicks then. These people aren't remembering their flocks in the way you remember a shopping list. They're remembering them like you remember a melody instinctively with your body, with rhythm. If the note's wrong, your spine feels it. You step outside again, the sash warm across your chest. There's no ledger, no number line, but somehow you know what to do. And the sheep. They fall into place like they've read the same woven story you now carry on your shoulder. You wake to the sound of hoofbeats on stone, soft, rhythmic, deliberate. The sun hasn't broken over the mountains yet, but the light is growing pink and bruised like the inside of a peach. You're lying beneath a heavy wool blanket that smells faintly of lanolin and rain. Somewhere nearby, a kettle hisses over embers. When you sit up, the herder is already outside, standing ankle-deep in cloud. The sheep are gathering behind her like shy ghosts. You shuffle over, rubbing your eyes. "How many today?" you ask, still groggy. She just smiles and raises an eyebrow. "How many what?" You blink. "Sheep." She shrugs. "Depends on the weather." "Right, of course." Here in the Andes, there are entire languages that don't use numbers in the way you're used to. One such language, Aymara, doesn't have words for 10 or 20. It doesn't even really use plural and singular the way English does. There's no 3 llamas or 5 rocks. Instead, you'd say something like a group of llamas or a few rocks more than two. The precision just isn't necessary. And the twist people raised in these cultures aren't bad at math. In fact, when tested, they can track quantities surprisingly well without ever needing to assign a number. Historians still argue whether this means humans are born with a natural sense of quantity that exists independently of language. Are numbers learned or innate? Is counting a cultural addiction? But here, standing among the fog, it doesn't feel like anyone's missing out. The herder gestures with a stick, and the animals respond like a symphony following a silent conductor. She isn't counting them. She's feeling them. You watch the way she nods slightly every time a familiar sheep passes her. Her hand flicks just a bit when one strays too far. And when two smaller ones nudge at each other, she grins without turning. She knows who they are, not what they add up to. And then you meet the real stars of the show, the children. Two boys, probably no older than 7, are perched on a rock playing a game with pebbles. You assume it's like marbles, but when you sit beside them, they explain very patiently, like you're a particularly slow goat, that the stones each represent a sheep in their father's flock. Not just one sheep in general, but specific ones. This one's Taru, the curly one who hates frogs, one says. And this is Piki, who always runs first. The children don't say we have 9. They say Turu's missing. He was here yesterday. And somehow they know that just from these little rocks and their order. You think about the apps you use to track steps, sleep, grocery lists, subscriptions, packages, passwords, calories, mood swings, and screen time, and suddenly feel a bit ridiculous. The boy rearranges the stones in a crescent and says this is how they sleep. Another one adds a white pebble near the middle. That's the new baby. A third draws a line through the dust. This is where the snake came. They don't need digits. Their math is spatial, emotional, embodied. You're starting to suspect that your own mind could work this way too if you just let go of the numbers. Andean herders have practiced this kind of counting without counting for centuries. They rely on pattern recognition, animal behavior, and sensory memory. They track the qualities of things rather than the quantities. One anthropologist once described it as counting like a poet, not a banker. Of course, not everyone's convinced this is sufficient. Some colonial Spanish officials were baffled and a little terrified by how the locals managed entire flocks without ever tallying them. They'd mutter things like, "This isn't bookkeeping, it's witchcraft, because if you can't write it down, how can you tax it?" You smirk imagining a conquistador trying to invoice someone for a group of very familiar sheep. The herder returns and taps the top of your head with her stick. Enough dreaming, she says. They're walking. And sure enough, the sheep have already begun their slow spiral across the terraces, moving like spilled ink down a slope. You start to follow, then pause. But wait, you say, aren't we supposed to count them before they go? She shakes her head. What for? You've got no answer, and neither do the sheep, except maybe a faint bleat that sounds suspiciously like a giggle. By mid-morning, the fog has burned away, revealing the highland sun in all its searing, no-nonsense glory. You squint upward as a condor wheels overhead, casting a flickering shadow across the stony trail. All around you, the sheep well llamas, alpacas, and a few scraggly high-altitude sheep amble along like they own the place, which honestly, they kinda do. You're beginning to notice something weird, or maybe not weird, just different. There's no order to the flock that makes sense to your Western spreadsheet-addled brain. No tidy rows, no fences. No one's calling out names or blowing whistles. The animals walk where they want, when they want, yet somehow never stray too far. They self-organize like a living algorithm that doesn't need to be told what to do. The herder trails behind them, seemingly relaxed, but her eyes are everywhere. They flick from a pebble out of place to a tuft of wool caught on a bush to a distant shape that might be a fox or might just be a boulder with attitude. She's not controlling the flock so much as dancing with it. And this is where things get even stranger. You ask her how she knows where each animal is supposed to be, how she keeps track. She lifts her staff and points to the group ahead. That one's Chippy, she says. He always walks left of Wera unless it's cold. Then he swaps with Nika. You squint. So, you memorize their behaviors. No, I remember the flock. She's not being difficult. She means it. To her, the flock isn't a collection of individuals, it's a shape. A moving, shifting body with moods, tendencies, and little quirks. If that shape feels wrong, she knows it instantly. It's like hearing a note go flat in a familiar song. This is how Andean herders have managed livestock for centuries without counting them individually. Instead, they watch patterns. Who tends to pair up, who walks in front when it's sunny, who vanishes into the thistles for a cheeky snack when no one's looking. Historians still argue whether this is a form of distributed cognition or just plain genius, shaped by necessity. You decide it's both. At one bend in the trail, she halts and narrows her eyes. The group is off. You can't tell how, but she feels it. She clicks her tongue and crouches, pressing her hand to the ground. She mutters, "Chappie isn't limping today." Wait, so she noticed not that someone was missing, but that a specific sheep's limp had disappeared. How is that even relevant? Because when he limps, he slows the others, she explains. If he walks normal, the back group breaks shape. Right, of course. Completely logical if your brain is a motion-sensitive cloud of animal awareness. You find yourself wondering how different the modern world might be if you could memorize people that way. Not as entries in a phone book or usernames on a screen, but as familiar patterns. Maybe you wouldn't forget birthdays if you remembered the shape of someone's presence instead of the number of candles. Anyway, back to the animals. Turns out size and color are also part of this visual sensory matrix. Herders learn to associate specific traits with individuals, but not in the "this one weighs 36 kilos" kind of way. More like the wool that looks like morning fog, or the ear that twitches twice before pooping. One quirky fact: some families train their llamas to respond to rhythm. They'll clap or tap a stick in a unique pattern, and only their animals react. It's like Bluetooth pairing, but fluffier. You try it. Tap, tap, pause, tap, nothing. The herder sighs. That's not even close. Turns out these rhythmic cues are passed down like songs. Each family has its own tempo. Some use flutes. Others use stones and gourd shakers. You imagine a sheep silently judging your beatboxing. Later, as the animals graze across a lichen-covered ridge, you spot a cluster forming 3 brown alpacas and a white one with a side-leaning head. Is that a subgroup, you ask? She nods. Brothers. But how do you know? She shrugs. They cuddle at night. Of course. The shape of the flock changes with mood, weather, time of day. The herder reads it like a meteorologist reads clouds. Or maybe like a grandma reads your face when you say, "I'm fine," and she knows you're absolutely not. No numbers, no lists, no tally marks, just the quiet rolling shape of trust. And as you follow the path trailing behind this ever-shifting creature called a flock, you start to feel it too when the rhythm skips, when someone hesitates, when something's not quite right. It's not math, it's memory. And maybe it's the kind of intelligence that doesn't live on paper. By late afternoon, the mountain air turns sharper, nipping at your ears with tiny frozen teeth. The clouds huddle low again, like they've got gossip to share with the peaks. You and the herder reach a rest stop, a wide, flat ledge where the animals begin to scatter and graze among the mossy stones. The herd breathes out a kind of woolly sigh. Now it's time to meet the strange and beautiful creature that secretly runs this whole operation, the quipu. You're not sure what you expected, maybe a scroll or a painted hide, but the herder pulls it out of a gourd bowl wrapped in cloth. What she holds is a bundle of cords. That's it. Long strands of spun fiber all hanging from a main cord like a jellyfish. Some are thin, others thick. Some are twisted clockwise, others counterclockwise. And some have knots, fat ones, dainty ones stacked singular off-center. She cradles it gently like a newborn goat. "This is my ledger," she says, "my memory." You take it carefully. It feels like hair and history, soft but not fragile. Heavy with something unsaid. These are quipus, a record-keeping device used throughout the Andean world for centuries, especially by the Inca. They weren't written in letters or symbols. They were written in knots. Literally. Position, tightness, type of knot, direction of cord spin, and even the color of the thread all conveyed different bits of information. Think of it like a textile spreadsheet, except more mysterious. Historians still argue whether quipus were strictly numerical or whether they also encoded narrative stories, laws, prayers, gossip. Some researchers are convinced certain arrangements are full sentences. Others say we're projecting too much, that they were just very clever accounting tools. Either way, this herder's quipu definitely isn't for calculating taxes. It's for keeping track of her flock not through numbers, but through relationships. She shows you a section with 3 knots spaced closely together. These are the sisters, she says. Always walk together. The one in the middle had a sore foot last season. You glance at the cord. That's in the knots. She chuckles. It's in me. The knots just remind me where to look. That's the kicker. Quipus aren't meant to stand alone. They don't make sense without the person who made them. They're more like musical scores that only one specific musician knows how to play. A diary with a key only you remember. Andean societies often used quipus communally. One person might be the knot maker, another the reader. Together, they could track taxes, births, crop yields, even the positions of the stars. But here, out on the mountain, a single quipu becomes a shepherd's external brain. She adds to it each season, tying new fibers in adjusting lengths, sometimes even removing a knot that no longer feels true. You notice something else too. The cords are made from different wools, some coarse, some soft, some dyed in vibrant hues, crimson, indigo, goldenrod, and others left plain. You ask why. The wool helps me feel what kind of day it was, she says. Warm days are soft wool. Hard winters, I use the scratchy stuff. My hands remember. That little detail breaks your brain a bit. You're so used to thinking of memory as something in your head, but she remembers with her hands, her eyes, her sense of touch. Memory isn't data here, it's texture. One quirky fact. Some researchers found that ancient Andean quipus were spun in particular patterns depending on whether they were made in coastal highland or jungle regions, like dialects in thread form, a kind of regional accent in fiber. Imagine your Google Doc speaking with a coastal lilt. You sit beside her and watch as she ties a new knot. Not rushed, not rigid. She pauses, lets the wool speak, and only then does she cinch the thread. It's like watching someone plant a thought in yarn. She holds it out. Want to try? Your first attempt is pathetic. You yank the wool too tight, then too loose, then in the wrong direction. She laughs until her shoulders shake. That's not a knot, she says. That's a panic. You try again slower this time, mimicking her motions. Twist, loop, press, pull. The rhythm feels good, familiar even, like handwriting you've always known but forgot how to form. When you finish, she nods solemnly. Now you have a sheep. You don't know which one it is, but you're weirdly confident you'll recognize it tomorrow. The sun dips behind a peak, casting long shadows like stretched taffy. The flock begins to stir again, sensing the shift before you do. And just like that, the herder stands, loops the quipu over her shoulder, and starts walking. You follow a single awkward knot in your pocket and a growing suspicion that math might not be as universal as they told you in school. You're walking again, boots crunching against gravel as twilight begins its slow descent over the mountains. The sheep, not that you've counted them of course, shuffle ahead in clumps, their silhouettes jagged like chunks torn from the horizon. The herder walks slightly behind, now letting the animals lead. Her staff taps rhythmically against the path, like punctuation in a sentence no one is speaking aloud. The air grows damp. Somewhere in the clouds above, thunder rolls low and lazy. You glance at her. Should we head back? She snorts. If the sheep aren't worried, why should we be? And that's when you notice something. The animals are calm, grazing, sniffing, occasionally squabbling over an interesting rock. No panic, no huddling. Whatever weather is coming, they've already read it and apparently decided it's no big deal. We watch the sky, she says, but we also watch the wool. You tilt your head. The wool. She reaches into her pack and pulls out a small cloth bundle. Inside are swatches of wool carefully arranged. Some are faded, others are almost unnaturally bright. You run your fingers over them, coarse, soft, curled, smooth. These are stories, she says, of the sky, the rain, the bad years. You blink. You're telling the weather through wool. She nods. We weave it in, every cloak, every shawl. The cloth in your hand is more than fashion. It's a kind of meteorological archive, that blue and white spiral, from a year when hail came every day for a week. The jagged black stitching along the edge, a frost so sudden it killed half the potatoes before dawn, and the gold thread barely visible in the corner. That was the year the rains came early, and the sheep birthed twins all season. It's memory as insulation, worn close to the skin. One fringe detail, some Andean communities believed certain wool patterns could protect against specific types of weather. A cloak woven with tight diamond motifs might help catch rain before it falls. Another with zigzags could confuse lightning. Historians debate whether these were symbolic charms or rooted in older ritual science, but either way, the wearers took it seriously. You think about your raincoat made of nylon mass-produced silent. It doesn't remember anything. It doesn't warn you or reassure you. It doesn't carry the story of the last storm or the next one. The herder folds the cloth and tucks it back away. We wear the sky, she says, so we don't forget it. You're still processing this when she crouches suddenly and grabs a tuft of moss. Feel, she says, offering it. You squeeze. It's damp but not soaked. Springy. Alive. Storm small, she says. It'll pass high. You squint up at the gathering clouds. How do you know that? She shrugs. Wool knows. It's not magic. It's muscle memory passed down across centuries. When you spend a lifetime touching fleece, you learn to feel its reactions. In a way, the animals are the barometers. When their wool begins to coil tighter or hold extra moisture, the herder notices before the storm even arrives. And then there's the wind. The sheep shift direction, slightly turning their sides to the breeze. The herder watches them for a moment, then adjusts her shawl. Time to move, she says. The wool says so. You follow, awestruck. All this time, you thought weather was something you measured with radar apps, Doppler charts. But out here, weather is something that lives in the animals, in the fabric, in the motion of the flock. You don't observe it. You feel it. As you walk, you begin to pick up other clues. The way certain flowers close earlier, the birds flying unusually low, a ripple in the sheep's collective movement as though they've remembered an old trail passed down through generations of hooves. It's like being inside a memory that isn't yours. The herder whistles softly a tune you don't recognize. The sheep spread a little, moving faster. Rain begins to tick softly against the rocks, but no one runs. No one huddles. The mountain doesn't panic, and neither do you. Because tonight the wool says everything's going to be just fine. By the time you reach the evening pasture, a wide bowl of grass cupped in the arms of two jagged peaks, the rain has tapered to mist like the mountain is exhaling. The flock fans out, lazily nibbling at the damp ground. There's no urgency, no fencing, no drama, just calm. You slump onto a rock soaked through but oddly warm and watch the herder at work. She's not doing much, at least not visibly. No clipboard, no head count, just pacing slowly in a wide arc, boots making soft squelches in the mossy soil. Her eyes flick across the flock, steady and slow. Occasionally she mutters something under her breath. A name maybe. A tiny observation. You think surely she doesn't actually know each one. And then she stops. There, she says, one's off. You squint. Where? She points. Middle back. The white one should be further left. You peer harder. All the sheep look the same, white fuzzballs with slightly sassy postures. But she's already walking. She doesn't run. She doesn't call out. Just strolls across the field like she's forgotten her thermos. The sheep part gently as she moves. And there, nestled among the others, is one that, yes, okay, does look a little out of place. Damp, tired, chewing more slowly. She kneels beside it, places a hand on its neck, waits a moment, and hums something low. And then she looks up at you. Fever. You just stare. She noticed a fever based on the sheep's location in the group. She shrugs. He usually walks beside his brother. Today, he's slow. This is the kind of knowledge you can't fake, can't scan, can't download. It's stitched into her the way a melody lives in the fingers of someone who's played it every day for 30 years. This is what Andean herders are known for, not just tending animals, but knowing them in ways that defy tidy Western categories. They track movement, yes, but also habits, moods, and subtle changes in flock behavior. And it works. One quirky tidbit. Some communities used to tie little threads, dyed wool, or plant fiber around the legs of specific animals, but not for identification in the way you tag cattle. These weren't IDs, they were reminders. A red thread might mean due to give birth soon. A green one likes to sneak into maize fields. The herder didn't need numbers, she needed context. Historians still debate whether this represents a system of proto-numeracy or something else entirely. Some argue it's a form of categorization that predates writing but exceeds mere tallying. Others think it reflects an entirely different logic, one based not on abstract quantification but on relational awareness. You lean back, letting that idea settle in. What if you tracked your friends like that? Not by birthdays or inbox history, but by who they sit next to at dinner, who laughs before they speak, who shifts when a certain song comes on. Not how many people are in your life, but how they are in your life. The herder returns the white sheep trailing behind her, subdued but responsive. She crouches beside you and begins placing small stones in a semicircle on the ground. Each stone is a different color shape and texture. "These are my map," she says. You watch as she adds a pebble shifts, 2 others removes 1. "This is today," she explains. She gestures to a smooth gray stone with a nick in its side. "That's him, the sick one." Another, a long, flattened one, represents the lead female, the one who always walks at the front when it's windy. A round, pitted chunk of quartz, the juvenile who likes to eat dirt. The placement of the stones mimics the arrangement of the flock current positions movement patterns, social groupings. She's not making a record to remember later. She's laying it out to see the flock from above, from the mind's sky. No numbers, no symbols, just pattern. You try arranging your own little map. It's laughably abstract. Yours looks like a confused salad. The herder just chuckles. "You'll get it," she says. Or not. She stands and walks back to the flock. And you sit staring at your rocks, wondering if maybe you've been counting the wrong things your whole life. The sun sinks behind the peaks in an orange sigh, and dusk stretches across the pasture like someone pulling a thick woolen blanket over the world. The sheep huddle in clusters, some settling near rock outcrops, others forming tight little circles like breathing piles of laundry. You're about to ask if it's time to corral them, but the herder just shakes her head and points. They're shaping. You blink and realize the flock isn't random. There's a shape forming. From above, it might even look like a ripple. A curl, maybe. The same curl they made this morning on the ridge. Not a coincidence. "They do this every night," she murmurs. "Same formation. When one is gone, the shape is wrong." You squint harder. The front half of the group arcs around a boulder. A few stragglers drift toward the back, but even they seem to settle in expected gaps, as if fulfilling their part in a living pattern. It's not choreography. It's not obedience. It's instinct or memory. You feel like you're watching a slow-breathing jigsaw puzzle, one that solves itself every evening with wool and hooves and silence. Not a single number has been spoken. No roll call, no head count. And yet, if one were missing, she'd know. Some scholars think this idea tracking animals by group shape, not tally, is one of the oldest forms of pattern recognition in human memory. Long before we could write or record, we understood when something's not right. Historians still argue whether this form of thinking is a pre-numerical system or a totally separate mental structure, one we've neglected in favor of calculators and Excel sheets. You watch as the herder walks slowly around the flock's outer edge, her feet brushing moss, her staff barely touching the ground. She's not circling to trap them, she's closing the loop. You feel it, the sheep feel it, and you're starting to remember the shape too. You sit down beside a warm rock and sketch the outline in the dirt with your finger. You trace the curl, the cluster by the boulder, the tiny crescent, where the younger ones gather. Tomorrow, you'll look to see if it holds. Then the herder kneels beside you and does something unexpected. She takes a flat piece of bark, presses it against the dirt drawing, and gently sprinkles powdered chalk, bright orange, over the surface. When she lifts it, a faint negative imprint remains. A record, she says. You smile, so you do make backups. She smirks, only when teaching. It's a fleeting moment, but you feel it, a transmission, not just of knowledge, but of rhythm. You're being tuned to this place, not with facts or rules, but with feel. One quirky practice you learn about later. Some herders build flock dolls, miniature models of their herds made from tufts of wool reeds and tiny clay stones. These aren't toys. They're teaching tools for children, and in some cases, ritual objects used to communicate with mountain spirits. Imagine making a dollhouse version of your flock, so the land could keep track of them too. The herder traces a circle in the dirt. That's the heart, she says, indicating the place where the flock curls tightest. If this breaks, something is wrong. She tells you stories, some whispered, some almost sung, of times when the shape didn't hold. The year a flash flood swept down a valley. The day a jaguar circled too close. The moment when a disease moved silently from one hoof to the next. In every case, the shape had warned them. You ask if the sheep know what they're doing. She shrugs. Maybe. Or maybe we taught each other. You lean back, staring at the sky. Stars are starting to drip through the dusk. One by one, they blink into view, like little knots on an invisible quipu stretched across the heavens. And suddenly it clicks. The flock is a quipu, a three-dimensional wool-covered four-legged quipu. Each sheep a cord, Each night, they tie themselves into memory, not with numbers, with presence, with shape. You sit in silence for a long while, letting that settle in your bones. When the herder finally stands, she says only, "We don't count sheep. We remember their rhythm." And as you follow her back to the small shelter, you wonder if maybe that's how you'll remember this place too. Not by how many steps you took or how many sheep you saw, but by the shape the day left in your chest. Morning returns quietly. No blaring alarm clocks, no buzzing notifications. Just the whisper of hooves over wet grass and the occasional bleat, long and low like a sigh. You sit up beneath your poncho joints, creaking from the stone floor of the shelter. Outside, the sky is a pale, undecided gray. And then color. When you step out into the cool air, you're met not just by sheep, but by a mosaic. Each animal is wearing something. Tiny woven bands, tassels, braids of colored fiber tied around legs, ears, even the tops of heads like little party favors. You stare. It's not decoration, it's information. The herder, already up and chewing a root that looks vaguely medicinal, watches you absorb the scene. "These help me remember," she says. "Who needs what?" It turns out that color in the Andean world isn't just aesthetic. It's functional. Entire systems of livestock management were built on visual codes. You don't tag a sheep with a number. You give it a hue, and that hue means something. You point to one with a vivid blue tassel. That one, "Fast walker," she says, "too fast," pushes the others. The yellow one, "Wanders," gets distracted by beetles. The green, "Mother, lost 2 lambs last year, still looks." You can't help but marvel. She's created a portable filing system, but instead of paper or spreadsheets, it lives in texture and tone. No numbers, no labels, just wool tied and dyed. And here's the wild part the sheep seem to know too. The one with the red braid keeps glancing at the herder like it's asking for extra attention. Another bearing purple thread near its ear keeps to the edge of the group, maybe waiting for someone to acknowledge its role. Historians still argue whether this use of color coding in Andean herding practices was formalized or improvised. Was there a village-wide consensus, or was it unique to each herder? Either way, the result is the same: a language without words, vibrant and alive. And it goes deeper than just the animals. You look closer and notice that the herder herself wears strands of yarn wrapped around her fingers. Some red, some brown, some multicolored like confetti. She catches your eye and gives a small grin. "These help me remember things," she says, wiggling her fingers. "Where I buried the salted maize. Which cousin is still angry. Who I owe a blanket." You nod slowly. Of course, color isn't symbolic here. It's mnemonic. Each shade triggers a thought, a memory, a tiny packet of meaning. Red doesn't stand for danger. It feels like the cliff where her uncle slipped. Blue is not sad. It's the memory of a cold river and a lost sandal. It's immediate physical. You walk among the flock, tracing your fingers over braids and tassels. The materials vary: llama fiber, alpaca fluff, even twisted strands of reed or dyed straw. Some are soft, some wiry. Some carry a faint scent of herbs or ash. It's not just visual, it's sensory layering. If the color fails, the texture speaks. If the texture's unclear, the scent might prompt the memory. One quirky historical note: in some parts of the Andes, it's said that herders would train children to memorize entire flocks through wool samples alone. A game at first matched the fleece to the animal. Over time, it became second nature. Kids would grow up able to identify 20, 30, even 50 animals by touch alone. You try it with the herder's guidance. She places a tuft of gray-brown wool in your palm and asks, "Who is this?" You panic. Softy McMossface." She laughs. "Close. That's Chiku. She hates rain." You laugh too. And then something clicks. This system, these colors, textures, scents, they aren't a workaround for forgetting. They are memory. They build memory into the world, into the wool, into your fingertips. And you wonder, what if you did that? What if your socks reminded you of a friend? If the color of your mug told you how your week was going? If your scarf whispered a story every time you put it on? The sheep begin to move, and the herder starts pulling cords from her pouch, fresh yarns to add. New colors, new cues. You help slowly, fingers fumbling. She ties each thread like a promise, not to the sheep, but to herself. To remember who they are, to remember what they've been through, to remember what matters without ever once needing a number. You're walking again, this time in deliberate circles. not because you're lost, but because you're learning. The herder leads the way, tracing a slow spiral around the pasture, the sheep scattered across the landscape like wool-covered punctuation marks in a sentence only she can read. You notice something odd every few steps. She mutters something almost like a chant. 3 loops for feeding, 4 for sleeping. She glances over her shoulder. Walk with me. And so you do. Around and around the same invisible track, your feet falling into rhythm with hers. The wind shifts. The light changes. The sheep move in distant counterpoint, but the walk continues. What are we doing? You ask, trying not to sound dizzy. We're making a day, she replies. It turns out in some Andean communities, time isn't tracked by hours or numbers. It's measured by movement, by how many loops you walk around your flock, by how many times you pass the same rock. The sheep are your clock and your calendar. You make your 3rd lap around a particular patch of thistles. She nods. That's enough for mid-morning. Historians still argue whether this practice constitutes timekeeping or whether it's something else entirely, a form of embodied memory. Instead of checking a device, you build your sense of time through repetition awareness pacing. The path teaches you time. The herder taps her staff against a low stone and pauses. That one marks the season. The stone. It's nothing special until she shows you the shallow groove worn into its surface. Every day I brush this stone with my staff. Just once. At the end of the season, it will be smooth. You run your fingers across the groove. It's subtle but unmistakable. Time made tactile. One quirky detail, some shepherds reportedly used their walking staffs to track days by etching notches or collecting pebbles in a hidden compartment. Others tied loops of colored wool, one for each lap around the herd. At the end of the day, they'd look at the loops not to count, but to feel how full the day had been. You and the herder resume your walking. She tells you about her grandmother who used to walk figure eights instead of circles because she said time should always cross itself. You laugh, unsure whether it's a metaphor or a math problem disguised as folklore. And then it hits you, this entire culture doesn't separate time from place. There's no disembodied schedule, no floating calendar grid. Time is here under your feet. It's the moss that's drier than yesterday, the wind that comes sooner in the afternoon, the sheep who shift their sleeping shape ever so slightly. You're dizzy, but not from the circles. You're dizzy from the realization that you've been tracking time wrong your whole life. Isn't it confusing, you ask? She squints up at the sky. Only if you forget to notice things. You wonder what she means, but then something clicks. One of the younger alpacas darts past you, its ears twitching. That one's early, she says. He never plays until after 3rd loop. How do you know it's only the 2nd loop? She smiles. Because you're not tired yet. A gust of wind rushes across the hilltop, and for a moment the wool tassels on the sheep flap like little flags. The herder stops walking, plants her staff in the ground, and exhales. That's midday. You look around. Nothing about the sky screams noon. No shadows pointing due south. No clocks, no bells. Just a shift. You feel it too. She sits, and you follow. You ask, what happens if you don't walk the loops? She shrugs. The sheep notice. So does your memory. You'll forget what kind of day it was. That lands with a thud in your chest. You think of all the days you've lost. Days that blurred into each other not because they were boring, but because you didn't walk them. Not really. You sat, scrolled, waited, watched the clock change instead of moving with it. The herder pulls a piece of thread from her pouch. It's purple, faintly frayed. She ties it around her wrist. Today was purple, she says. You raise your eyebrows. For the wind, for the young one's run, for the way you finally noticed what time looks like when you move through it. You sit with that. Then you take a green thread the same shade as the moss underfoot and wrap it around your own wrist. A quiet loop, a mark, a memory. You don't know what it will mean yet, but you know it will mean something. Night falls again, but this time it arrives with music. Not the kind from speakers or earbuds, not even from instruments, at least not ones you'd recognize. It begins with a hum low and steady floating out across the pasture like a warm mist. Then comes a higher voice, thin bird-like, layered on top of the first, and finally a soft rhythmic clicking, like pebbles in a pouch or fingernails on a clay pot. You squint through the dark. There she is, the herder perched on a rock just beyond the sheep. Her staff leans beside her. Her eyes are half closed. She's singing. Not for you. Not even for herself. She's singing the flock to sleep. You shuffle closer, careful not to disturb whatever magic this is. and settle beside her. The tune isn't catchy. It's not meant to be. It loops, stretches, returns to itself like a lullaby caught in a dream. But listen closely, there are names in it. Not human ones. Animal ones. You hear words like Kupanina Chaska whispered into the notes, each repeated softly like a prayer. You glance at the sheep. They're responding. The restless ones settle. The twitchy ones lie down. Even the young ones, the wild ones, seem to tuck into the formation you saw yesterday. The spiral, the ripple, the breathing memory shape. She remembers them in the song you whisper. The herder nods. They remember themselves too. It's an old practice, one that still lingers in corners of Andean highland life. Songs composed to mark the flock's current state. Not for entertainment, for tracking, for memory. Instead of reciting numbers, you sing the order of the animals who's walking beside whom, who wandered during the day, who is expected to birth soon. It's a living archive refreshed every sunset. Historians still argue whether these songs qualify as oral records or something more ephemeral. Some believe they were unique every night like snowflakes. Others think each family passed down standard melodies with slight variations like a musical version of inherited handwriting. You ask if she sings the same song every evening. She chuckles. No, the sheep decide the lyrics. One quirky story she shares, her mother once sang a sheep's name out of order, putting Luli before Taxa, when usually Luli always followed behind. The next morning, Luli was gone, vanished into the fog like a woolen ghost. She was offended, her mother said. No one likes being misplaced. Was it coincidence maybe? But out here, memory isn't something you file. It's something you perform. If you don't sing it, it drifts away. You listen harder. Some parts of the melody repeat a refrain built from the elder animals' names, always in the same order. Others change depending on the day. Sometimes it's a call-out. Michi nibbled the bellflower, or Tuka chased shadows again. Each line a diary entry. Each rhythm a step in the walk of the day. You hum along softly at first. The herder doesn't stop you. In fact, she adds a harmony, weaving your hesitant notes into her own, as if that's exactly where they belonged. For a moment, you are inside the song, not listening to it, inside it, like wool on a spindle being turned into thread. And suddenly you understand something new. You've been looking for logic here, for systems, for structure, trying to fit this life into your world's obsession with measurement. But the truth is, this isn't a replacement for counting. It's an entirely different orientation. Here, knowledge is alive, mutable, sung, felt. It's a cloud that changes shape every night, and remembering isn't the act of recording, but the act of recreating. And the sheep. They're still, fully still, eyes half shut, chewing slowing, breathing matched to the rhythm of the song. You ask, do they understand it? The herder shrugs. Do you understand every word of your lullabies? Fair point. The song trails off into silence. No applause. No thank you. Just a sigh, a pause, and the soft thud of hooves shifting in sleep. The herder leans back against her rock. That's today tucked in. You close your eyes, and for the first time in longer than you care to admit, you remember every single moment of the day, not because you tracked it, but because you sang it. The next morning, you're woken not by a rooster or a bell, or even a sheep's bleat, but by a clink, soft metallic, rhythmic. You sit up groggily and see the herder crouch beside a woven pouch, pulling out what looks like a handful of pebbles bones and polished shells. She's laying them out on a flat stone in front of her, each piece carefully placed. Not randomly, no, this is definitely deliberate. Like arranging sacred puzzle pieces. You crawl over, rubbing your eyes. Morning ritual. She shakes her head. Morning map. Each object she lays down represents something or someone. She taps a smooth white shell. That's Puna, she says. Likes to sleep on the edges. A piece of bone with a dark spot, Yaku. He always walks slow when it's going to rain. You reach for a rounded chunk of quartz, but she gently bats your hand away. Not yet, that's the eldest. She goes last. These aren't just tokens. They're memory anchors. The flock in miniature, but instead of being drawn or numbered, it's felt. The shapes, the textures, the sound each object makes as it hits the stone, it all holds meaning. And here's the kicker. These aren't standardized tools. Each herder creates their own materials, their own placement logic. What matters is the relationship between pieces. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, or whether it falls into ritual superstition or practical memory work. But one thing is clear, it's not about counting, it's about recognizing. These tokens don't track how many sheep exist, but how they move, how they behave, and how they feel to the person who's watching. You watch her arrange a small ring of pebbles around a jagged black shard. That one you ask. She grins. That's me. I stay in the middle. You smirk. You made yourself the center of the universe. She winks. If I don't, they wander. Fair enough. You try making your own version. She hands you a few spare objects, a pebble with a hole in it, a flat chip of obsidian, a dried corn kernel, and tells you to think of 3 sheep you saw yesterday. Not to describe them, just to remember them. You close your eyes. There was the one with the pink tassel who kept stepping into puddles like it was a lifestyle, the grumpy brown one who side-eyed you the entire walk, and that tiny one who kept losing track of its mother. You place the objects down, guessing where they might fit. She watches silently, then nods once. They'll do. It's not an accuracy test. It's a connection test. And here's where it gets weird. Later in the morning, as the sheep begin their slow crawl down the slope, those exact 3 animals cluster together right in the formation you made. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe you're starting to feel the rhythm too. One quirky side note, in some regions, herders believed certain shells could store a sheep's personality. If the shell chipped, they'd say, that one's having a rough day. Others believed whistling over the bone would call the sheep it represented like a woolly voodoo beacon. You don't ask whether she believes that, but she does whistle occasionally when she's alone, and you notice the sheep react every time. You spend the morning learning this new language. She gives you more objects, some smooth, some jagged, some warmed by the sun. Each has a story, a shape, a small gravitational pull. Eventually, you begin to anticipate their order. You feel when something's missing. You notice when a piece is out of place, not because you counted wrong, but because the arrangement feels off. And that's the secret, really. This isn't about precision, it's about balance, harmony. A flock doesn't need to be measured, it needs to be understood. You think of your own life, your planner, your apps, your endless to-do lists. Do you track things because you need to, or because you've forgotten how to feel when something is out of place? You look down at your tiny map. You don't know their names, not fully, but you're starting to know their shapes, their weight, their presence. And for now, that's more than enough. You've been here long enough now that the mountain no longer feels like a stranger. The cold doesn't bite as sharply. The wool smells less like barn and more like comfort. Even the sheep seem to regard you less like an outsider and more like a slightly confused honorary member of the herd. So when one goes missing, you feel it before you know it. There's no dramatic moment, no gasp, no sudden shout, just a hush, a ripple, a shift in shape. You're standing on a slope overlooking the grazing field. The sun's inching toward the peak shadows, long and angled. The flock moves steadily, except it's off. Not drastically, just subtly, like a painting that's been nudged half an inch sideways. You can't name it, you can't point to it, but you feel it. So does the herder. She stops mid-step. Her eyes scan the field. Her jaw tightens, not in panic, but in concentration. And then she whispers, Chintu's not here. No counting, no roll call, no clipboard, just knowing. She turns back toward the trail you walked that morning. He'll have stopped where the moss is thick. He likes the wet. You follow her without question. What you learn that afternoon is that absence has a shape too. It echoes. It leaves a kind of shadow behind a missing rhythm, a hole in the flock's choreography. It's hard to explain. You just sense it. This is what Andean herders have long understood. The flock is a living network. Each member affects the others. They're not interchangeable wool bundles. They're personalities, positions, pulses. When one goes missing, the entire system leans slightly sideways. Historians still argue whether this level of awareness was instinctual or trained. Some researchers believe it's a byproduct of constant observation, decades spent watching subtle behaviors. Others argue it's part of a cultural framework where relationships matter more than enumeration. You don't count your sheep, you know them. After about 15 minutes of retracing your path, the herder stops. She crouches beside a patch of thick, velvety moss, and sure enough, there's Chintu, curled up, calm, his leg caught under a root. No panic, just a sheep-shaped bump of resignation. The herder frees him gently, whispering a quiet scold under her breath. She rubs her thumb behind his ear, one of those small, ancient gestures, and he stands, stretches, and rejoins the world like nothing happened. As you walk back, you ask, "What if you'd been wrong?" She shrugs. "Then we'd be two fools looking for someone who wasn't lost." That's better than not noticing at all. You sit with that. In your world, missing usually triggers alerts, GPS pings, panicked spreadsheets. But here, the warning system is softer, more relational. A feeling in the flock, a tug in the gut, a thread gone slack. One quirky detail: some herders keep a strand of colored wool braided with little knots, one for each animal. Not for tallying, but for tugging. Throughout the day, they'll absent-mindedly run their fingers down it. If one knot feels off, too loose, too tight, strangely warm, they pause. Think. Check the flock. Like a worry bead rosary for memory. Back at the pasture, the flock accepts Chintu's return without drama. No headbutting, no scolding. He slips back into his usual spot center left of the curl, and the rhythm resumes. And there's something else you hadn't noticed until now. Your own body's been tracking him too. Because now that he's back, you feel right again. Balanced, like a chair leg finally touching the floor. You didn't count him. You just missed him. And now you don't. You wake up the next day with a different kind of awareness, not just of your limbs or the cold creeping into your boots, but of them, the flock. You don't just see them now. You feel where they are like a soft, woolly radar pinging somewhere behind your ribs. And you're not the only one. As you sit chewing your now familiar breakfast of roasted maize and coca leaf tea, the herder looks out at the slope and mutters something under her breath. You don't catch it at first. Then she repeats it, too quiet. You listen. There's wind. There's bird call. There's a distant bleat. But she's right. The usual background hum of the flock is off. Not because anyone's gone this time, everyone's present. But something's unsettled. She stands slowly. Come. You follow her as she crosses the grazing field, eyes scanning the group, not for individuals, but for group feeling. That's the only way to describe it. It's not about what's there, it's about what isn't moving right. Two animals, normally side by side, are now opposite ends of the spiral. Another is grooming obsessively. A fourth lies too still. Nothing overtly wrong, but the flock's collective vibe, for lack of a better term, is off-center. We're out of rhythm, she says. Is that bad? She shrugs. It means we listen. Here's what you learn next. The community doesn't expect one person to know everything about the flock. Instead, everyone shares part of the memory. The ant who notices who likes which patch of grass, the cousin who recognizes which sheep grumble before storms, the child who watches who cuddles together at night. They don't memorize in isolation, they memorize together. It's a distributed brain spread across the village. So, when something feels off, like now, they don't panic. They ask around. You visit the weaver. She remembers one sheep had a patch of fungus last week. You visit the boy who brings salt. He says the youngest lamb didn't eat this morning. A trader passing by says he saw the flock bunching unusually tight yesterday on the South Ridge. Piece by piece, you assemble a fuzzy but real picture. And it works. The herder mixes herbs into a shallow bowl and rubs the mixture into a few animals' hooves. Preventative, maybe even ritualistic. But it's also diagnostic. She watches how each one reacts to the scent, to the pressure. The sheep aren't just livestock. They're mirrors. One quirky practice during festivals, some Andean communities hold mock trials for sheep who misbehave, stealing grain, straying too far, kicking others. It's done with laughter and ceremony. But underneath the humor is a deep truth. Each animal has a role, a personality, a story. When one acts out, it throws off the balance. The trial is a way to acknowledge the disturbance and reweave the social fabric. And now, standing in the damp grass, you see that exact philosophy at work. The herder calls the flock into a tighter formation, not with commands, but with rhythm. A beat tapped on a gourd, a whistle, a subtle sway of her shoulders. And slowly, like fog lifting from a mirror, the shape returns. The grooming stops. The stillness breaks. The spiral reforms. Whatever shadow had settled has moved on. You glance around and realize you helped, not directly, not with expertise, but by noticing, by asking questions, by adding your own thread to the tapestry of understanding. That's what the Andean herders have always known. Memory isn't private, it's communal. One person can miss something, but 10 people together rarely do. Especially if they're paying attention. As the flock settles and begins to graze again, the herder places a stone at the edge of the path. Small, round, unmarked. What's that for? She shrugs. To remember this moment. You pause, so you'll know if it happens again. She shakes her head. So we don't forget that we fixed it. That lands differently, not like a lesson, but like a gift. Not all memory is about tracking failure. Some of it is about honoring the times when things were made right. And this, you realize, is what it means to truly know your sheep, not just to know who is missing, but to know when the whole is hurting, even if every part seems fine. By now, you walk among them like you belong. The sheep don't flinch when you pass. The alpacas give you only the mildest of side eyes. And the herder, she started handing you the staff in the mornings without a word, like you've earned a kind of silent promotion. You've stopped trying to count. Instead, you watch, you listen, you feel. And today, you learn to read not with your eyes, but with your fingertips. You're led to the edge of the village where an old man sits weaving something curious. It's not a sash or a poncho or anything you've seen before. It's thin and long, coiled like a serpent across his lap, and woven with tiny fluctuations, tight here, loose there. Not a pattern you recognize. No bright colors. Just earthy browns, whites, dull oranges. This is how he knows his herd, the herder says quietly. By feel. The man doesn't speak. He just lifts the cord and places it in your hands. And you feel it, the differences, the dips, the slight deliberate irregularities. Each one is intentional. Each one means something. He doesn't see much anymore, the herder explains. So he weaves their memory into this, touch by touch. You run your fingers along the cord. There's a loop, a thick knot, a spot where the wool changes texture. It's like Braille, but not for letters, for sheep. And then softly he speaks. That bump, that's Turi. He drags his left foot, makes his wool lump. You're stunned. He's not just remembering. He's tracking movement, physicality, history tactily. It's not abstract. It's embodied. Historians still debate whether this type of weaving counts as a subset of the Quipu system or something else entirely. Some say these flock cords were individualized mnemonic devices. Others suggest they were part of a spiritual relationship between the herder and the flock, a sensory language passed down through touch. You ask the man how he remembers what's what. He shrugs, then offers a soft reply. Your fingers know before your mouth does. You let that sink in. He guides your hand again. This lump means the black one's coat grew too fast. This tight bit where two fought. That soft patch, a birth. And that knotted twist there. He pauses. That's when she died. You freeze. Your fingers linger on the knot. She was mine for 12 years, he says, not looking up. Good walker, loved music. You don't ask why the knot is where it is. You don't need to. Instead, you sit beside him, and he shows you how to twist wool in that same way. The rhythm is slow, almost meditative. It's less about making a record and more about honoring it. One quirky practice among some herders involves tying these cords into their walking staffs. The wool threads braid around the wood, embedding decades of knowledge in each step. Lose the staff, they say, and you'll forget the rhythm of your land. You glance down at the staff the herder gave you this morning. It's plain, but now you wonder how much is in it. You try weaving your own touch memory cord that afternoon. Just a small one. A few bumps. A curl. A tighter section. The herder watches, nodding slowly. What's that one, she asks, pointing to the thick spot. You smile. That's the one that bites ankles. She grins. Name. You hesitate, still thinking. She nods. That's okay. Names come after knowing. And so, you continue. Twisting, pressing, remembering, not with your brain, but with your hands. You realize that your fingers are starting to carry memories your mind hasn't fully formed yet. When the wind picks up, the old man ties his cord around his wrist, stands and disappears into the pasture. The sheep follow. They don't need to see him. They just know. And maybe that's the point. You don't count what you love. You remember it. In your body. In your thread. In the way your hand curls around a knot that holds a life. The sky today is bright and cloudless, one of those rare mountain mornings where the world seems carved from pure light. The sheep move slowly, grazing in long, lazy lines. You follow behind, walking without watching your feet, because by now you know the rhythm of this place. You can feel where the stones are, where the moss gets slick, where the path narrows. And the herder, she's watching you. You're starting to listen, she says with a small smirk. You smile back, to the sheep, to the silence. It's a strange compliment, but you'll take it. Today she's teaching you something else entirely, something more abstract, but no less important, how to share memory. See, no herder remembers everything. No one person holds the complete flock in their head or in their hands. Instead, memory is divided intentionally, spread across people's spaces, textures, threads. So when the herder needs to rest or travel or sleep deeply, someone else steps in. And that person doesn't ask, how many sheep? They ask, what shape is the flock today? You're about to find out what that means. The herder's cousin arrives humming softly with a carved wooden flute strapped to his waist and a sash tied diagonally across his chest. He doesn't greet you, he greets the flock. He walks among them, slowly murmuring names and notes under his breath. He ties a new thread to one sheep's leg, adjusts a tassel on another. He's not checking quantity, he's relearning the pattern, reweaving the group into his mind. He hasn't seen them in 2 weeks, the herder says, but he'll remember by lunch. And sure enough, as the day unfolds, he begins to move like he belongs. The sheep drift toward him. He whistles, and a few speed up. He claps twice, and one with a limp changes direction. No numbers, just music and motion. This shared memory is more than just practical. It's cultural. It's protective. If the herder got sick or injured or simply died, the flock wouldn't be lost. Its shape, its rhythm, its identities would live on in others. Historians still debate whether this kind of communal cognition existed at scale. Was it used for villages, cities, empires, or was it mostly localized, shared between a few families? But one thing is clear for the Andean herders, memory has always been a team sport. One quirky custom, sometimes herders would create miniature effigies of their flock, made of reed's wool and small stones, and give them to younger siblings or children as practice herds. These weren't toys. They were apprenticeships. A child who could remember a dozen of these figures, who ate who liked to sleep, where was considered ready to help with the real thing. You watch as the cousin places a small reed figure on the ground just outside the circle of the flock. For my daughter, he says. She's learning. You peer at the figure. It has a tiny braid around its middle, a red thread tied at the foot, a swirl of dried herb tucked into its back. It smells faintly of eucalyptus and old sunshine. She'll carry this, he says. She'll feel it when she's far from home. It's part compass, part diary, part soul. And now you understand something even deeper. Memory here is not just about recall, it's about belonging. To share the memory of the flock is to share responsibility, to share identity. It's not enough to know the sheep, you have to carry them with you, not as weight, as presence. You ask the cousin how he remembers them so quickly. He shrugs. They tell me. And you believe him. Because out here, remembering isn't a mental task. It's a conversation between you, the sheep, the wind, the threads, the rocks. It's something you tune into, not something you store. As the sun begins its slow slide toward the peaks, the cousin turns to you and asks, "Want to try?" You hesitate, then nod. He hands you 3 small reed figures. Show me where they go. You walk slowly, place one near a patch of soft grass, one beside a sun-warmed boulder, one nestled in the shade. You don't know their names, but you know where they belong. The cousin watches, then nods once. You remember more than you think. And in that moment, you realize this knowledge isn't fading. It's growing, not linearly, not in a checklist, but like a web, a woven shape. You're part of the shared memory now, and the flock doesn't just tolerate you anymore. It includes you. It's cold again, biting cold, the kind that sinks through your layers and camps out in your joints like it paid rent. The sky hangs low, a thick smear of silver mist pressing down on the mountains, making the whole world feel like it's underwater. The flock doesn't seem to mind. They shuffle along, breathing little puffs of wool-scented fog into the morning air. You, on the other hand, are mildly regretting your life choices. The herder sees you shiver and tosses you something. A shawl, coarse but warm, woven thick with geometric bands. You wrap it around your shoulders gratefully, and then you pause. Because the pattern isn't just decorative, it feels familiar. You run your hand along one of the red bands and recognize the looped shapes from a few days ago, the same shape the flock made at dusk, the same knot you tied into your little practice cord. Wait, you say, this shawl. She nods, it remembers. You blink. You mean, this is about the sheep. It's about this week with the sheep. You look down again. The pattern is complex, but now you see the logic. Thick, blocky segments in alternating reds and browns. Those must be the days. Thin zigzags in between, maybe the changes in weather. That swirl motif at the edge. It's the day Chintu went missing. You feel a thrill of recognition, like finding your own handwriting on a wall in a distant city. This is the story of the week you whisper. She grins, exactly. You've seen this before, on belts, on hats, even on saddle blankets, but you hadn't realized these aren't just nice designs. They're mnemonic textiles, clothes that remember. The act of wearing them is a form of storytelling, of carrying memory with you. Historians still argue how much of this is symbolic and how much is literal. Did every weaver use the same codes? Were there regional variations? Or was it all deeply personal, more art than record-keeping? No one agrees. And maybe that's the point. Because here's the thing, these garments aren't meant to be read like books. They're meant to be felt, worn, noticed. You ask how she weaves them. I don't, she says. My aunt does. She walks with me, listens, watches. Then she weaves the pattern while it's still fresh. She memorizes everything. No, the herder replies, she memorizes me. That lands like a small avalanche. This memory isn't just about sheep. It's about you, your movements, your habits, your griefs, the weight of your footsteps, and the sound of your breath in the early dawn, the shape of your life woven into a shawl. One quirky tradition she tells you about: some Highland families keep entire wardrobes organized by memory. One poncho might only be worn when a particular sheep dies, another only when the rainy season begins. Some are never worn at all, only displayed, because they carry memories too heavy for the body. You reach out to trace another symbol, a yellow stripe interrupted by tiny black diamonds. That's when the flock split too early, she says. You nod. You remember that morning. Everyone felt off. The shawl makes you feel it again, not as data, as sensation. You ask, do you make a new one every week? Only the important ones. You fall silent for a moment, holding that answer. Because isn't that what you've been missing? You record everything: photos, calendar, events, mileage, but none of it means anything unless you decide it matters. Here, memory isn't about what happens. It's about what's worth weaving. The herder adjusts the shawl on your shoulders, securing it with a small silver pin shaped like a spiral. Now you're wearing it, she says. Let's see what you remember. You join the flock. The wind stings, but the wool holds you like a story. And as you walk, you start to notice more. The way one lamb keeps nudging its mother's side. The way the grass changes color just before it ices over. The way the spiral of the group tightens when a hawk circles high above. By afternoon, you're walking not just with the sheep. You're walking through memory itself. Stitched, spun, sung, felt. And at the center of it all, you carry warmth not from fire or fabric, but from the fact that you're now part of something being remembered. It's market day. You didn't expect it to be so, quiet. There's no shouting, no chaos, no haggling in the sense you're used to, just a slow, steady rhythm of exchange, as if the mountains themselves have decided that commerce too should move at a thoughtful pace. The herder leads you down a narrow path to a valley where other families have gathered. Blankets are spread out like colorful islands. Piles of wool, bunches of herbs, baskets of dried maize, and, of course, sheep, all arranged with a kind of quiet ceremony. But here's the wild part: no scales, no coins, no scribbled price tags, and absolutely definitively no calculators. You watch as one woman hands over a roll of soft caramel-colored wool and receives 2 woven belts in return. No one argues. No one hesitates. The exchange is wordless smooth, like completing a handshake that began generations ago. You blink. How do they know it's fair? The herder smiles. They remember. In this part of the Andes, trade isn't just about goods. It's about trust memory. You don't track what something's worth in numbers. You track what it meant the last time someone gave or received it. Was that wool good last winter? Did this family's potatoes keep well last season? Did her sheep survive the cold? Prices aren't set, they're felt. Historians still argue how trade worked before colonial currencies disrupted everything. Some think there were conversion rates encoded in textiles and colors. Others suggest that value was tracked communally, like a living ledger that existed only in people's heads and relationships. A few researchers have even proposed that certain weaving patterns signaled trade routes, alliances, or histories of fairness. You watch another trade unfold. A man offers a gourd of fermented maize, drink chicha, and receives a bundle of red-dyed wool. No discussion, just a nod, a smile. The herder whispers they know that red. It holds color, even after 7 rains. They remember. That's when you realize you're not in a marketplace. You're in a memory place. Every object has a story. Every trade is a chapter added to a long collective book. And the sheep. They're part of this too. Some are traded not for money, but for promises. You overhear an elder mutter, "I'll give you Kura's son if you bring back salt before the freeze." The deal is sealed not with ink, but with a hand on the chest and a bit of red yarn tied between two walking sticks. You ask, what if someone cheats? The herder chuckles. Then everyone remembers that too. One quirky tradition still practiced in some highland areas: when two people make a major trade, they eat together, usually potatoes, herbs, or dried meat, and whatever is left over is wrapped in cloth and buried in the earth nearby. It's not superstition, it's a receipt. The land holds the record, and if there's ever a disagreement, they dig it up, literally, and talk it through. That afternoon, someone offers the herder a woven tunic in exchange for one of her older alpacas. You're surprised when she says yes. "I thought she was one of your favorites." She, as the herder, replies, "But this tunic remembers a storm I don't. I need that." You hold the tunic. It's thick with dark blue swirls that feel like wind and pale diamonds stitched around the edges like drops of hail. There's a weight to it, not just physical, but emotional. It's not currency. It's context. You help lead the alpaca to her new owner, who whispers something to the animal as she accepts it like a blessing, or maybe an introduction. No receipt is signed, no account is updated, but you know this transaction will live on in tassels, in songs, in the feel of a tunic on your shoulders when the next storm rolls in. As you walk back up the mountain path, the herder says, "You see now why we don't count." You nod. Counting assumes forgetfulness, memory assumes connection, and in a world where everything is remembered not just by minds but by hands, wool's stories, stones, trust is the currency that never devalues. The wind tonight is different. Not stronger, not colder, just different. Like it's carrying something with it. A murmur, a shift, a quiet breath from the mountain that makes the hair on your arms rise even beneath layers of wool. The sheep feel it too. You can tell by the way they gather closer backs to the wind, forming that familiar spiral, but tighter, like a watchful eye closing. The herder doesn't speak. She's tying something, a thin piece of wool, no longer than your hand, dyed an unusual dark green and threaded through with a single strand of white. She ties it around your wrist, pulling it snug, but not tight. "What's this for?" you ask. "To help you listen." You wait, thinking there's more coming. Some poetic explanation, a folktale, a lesson. But that's it, just to help you listen. And in that silence, the mountain begins to speak. You start to notice things you wouldn't have caught even yesterday. A small tremor in the ground, the way certain birds fly lower than usual, how the sheep that normally doze alone are now pressed close to their siblings. There's no panic, but there's awareness. The herder walks the edges of the flock, not pacing like usual, but slowly tracing a boundary, dragging her staff through the soil as she goes. She's drawing a line, you say aloud, more to yourself than anyone else. She's asking the land to watch over them, says a voice behind you. It's the cousin again, the one who helped earlier with the memory cords and reed figures. He's wrapped in a black poncho tonight, one embroidered with silver spirals you didn't see before. His eyes are fixed on the herder, but his hands are busy with something else, small bells tied to thin lengths of braided cord. These are their voices, he explains. If anything moves wrong, the sound will tell us. He hands you one. You turn it over in your palm, just a pebble-sized bell, quiet as a breath. He ties it gently around the neck of a sleepy sheep and nods. They sing when they're disturbed. Sure enough, as the wind shifts again, a faint chime rings out from the far side of the flock. Not urgent, not sharp, but just enough to pull attention. It's not surveillance, it's resonance. One quirky practice. Some herders believe the mountain spirits send dreams to sheep before danger comes. A shift in sleep behavior, a twitching leg, a sudden bleat in the dark can be interpreted as a warning. In some villages, entire families will sleep near the flock during certain phases of the moon just to hear the animals dream. You listen now. Really listen. You notice that the breathing of the group has slowed, that a few younger ones are awake when they're usually snoring, that the wind no longer rushes but pulses. The herder returns and squats beside you. Feel that she asks. You do, but you don't know what it is. She places her palm to the ground. Storm's not coming tonight, but something is. Not every night is about numbers or patterns or even memory. Some nights are just about being ready, not because a chart said so, but because the flock, the whole living network, says something's off. You press your hand to the earth, mirroring hers. Nothing happens. And yet everything does. You think about how different your old life was, always asking for proof, for stats, for graphs, for evidence. Here they ask something stranger, something older. Do you feel it? Yes, you do. And in the quiet, you understand something no data point could ever teach you. Awareness isn't about knowing the future. It's about trusting that when it comes, you'll feel the shift in the wool, in the wind, in the breath of the earth beneath your feet. The next morning, the mountain glows, not with sunlight, though the dawn is golden, but with quiet, a kind of contentment that hums through the air, as if even the rocks are exhaling. The storm, or whatever it was, never arrived. Or perhaps it was here, just quietly observed, acknowledged, and then released. You stretch under your blanket and feel something unexpected pride, not because you did anything special, but because you felt it. You were part of the warning. You heard the silence shift. The herder greets you with a bowl of warm mash and a soft smile. You listened. You nod, still groggy. Barely, but enough. The sheep move gently today, almost lazily, as if recovering from vigilance. Their pace is slower, but their formation is perfect, tight, balanced, rhythmic. They know she says, "Last night counted." You tilt your head. Counted. She grins, not by numbers, by weight. You think you understand. Some days are light, others are heavy, and this one, it has a weight to it, a sense of completion, like something's come full circle. And then she says it. "Today you'll lead." Your heart stutters. Me. She hands you the staff, the same one she's carried since your first morning here, the one with the worn grip and the etched lines you still don't fully understand. You've learned the rhythm, now show it. And so you do. At first it's awkward, you step too fast. The sheep hesitate. You glance back more than you should. But then you remember you don't command the flock. You listen to it. You walk with it. You feel it. So you slow down. You let the shape form around you. You stop thinking about how many are here or whether any are missing. You walk with your body, not your brain. And somehow, magically, invisibly, it works. They follow. And not just because they trust the staff, or the path, or the sound of your boots. They follow because you're walking the way they remember being walked. The way the herder walked. The way their mothers walked. The way the mountain taught all of them to move together. One quirky tradition the herder later tells you is that some Andean families record a first solo shepherding day by adding a unique motif to a woven belt, a zigzag for the path, a spiral for the flock's shape, a single diamond for the shepherd's own rhythm. She offers to weave yours tonight, but only if you remember the feeling. Not the steps, she says, the weight of the day. And you do, because as the sun lifts higher, you realize you're not watching the flock anymore. You are part of it. You lead them down into the valley, across the ridge, along the stone path where you once stumbled, past the place where Chintu got caught, through the soft moss where the reeds hum in the breeze. You carry them not on your back, but in your rhythm. The herder follows a little ways behind, silent, watching, not judging, just remembering you. And when the pasture opens up and the flock begins to spread out into that familiar evening spiral, she steps up beside you and says very softly, "You've learned to count without counting." You smile. "I don't even know how many there are." She chuckles. "Neither do I." You both sit. Watch. And the spiral tightens just enough to tell you everyone is here. The day is whole. The memory has been made, and not one number needed to be said. The evening comes quietly like a soft hush from the mountains. You're not in the pasture this time. The herder has taken you somewhere else higher than usual, where the air thins and the earth feels brittle underfoot. The sheep are far below, barely dots in the fading gold of sunset. Here, it's just the two of you, and a bundle of cords laid carefully between two rocks. "These are old," she says, as if that's both an explanation and a warning. You kneel. Dozens of strands spill outward, braided, looped, dyed. They're stiffer than the others you've touched, more brittle, with some threads faded to the color of dry bark. They don't feel like something you use. They feel like something you uncover. "These were my grandfather's," she says, "and his grandfather's before that." You don't ask how old. It doesn't matter. Because the moment you touch them, you know these are memory cords. Not for counting, not even for keeping track of the flock. These are life cords, records of years, of harvests, of storms that changed everything. The first cord is thick, almost heavy, woven from black and red wool, the colors so tightly packed they ripple in the light. That was the year the river rose and took the southern terraces. You trace your fingers along a series of triple knots that follow a loose spiral. The shape feels familiar. Those are the migration patterns, she whispers, where the sheep had to go, where the grass came back first. Each knot is more than a marker, it's a place, a moment, a decision. Historians still puzzle over caipas like these. Were they strictly economic records, as the Spanish believed, or were they more? Some claim that certain narrative cords survived epic stories encoded in color and structure passed from generation to generation. There's no consensus, just a lingering reverence for something too rich to fully decode. You pick up a thinner cord, pale brown with tiny green fibers wrapped around one end like a bracelet. That was the drought, she says. The sheep stopped bleeding. The grass turned to knives. You try to imagine remembering something through touch alone, not rereading an entry, not opening a file, just running your hands along wool and knowing this is what it felt like when the mountain turned against us. One quirky belief. In some parts of the Andes, it was said that the mountain spirits Apus could read the cords too, that if you laid them out properly during a full moon, the wind would answer through rustling reeds or shifting soil. Not a superstition, a practice, a conversation across centuries. The herder unrolls one final cord. It's different, white, almost colorless, just a single knot slightly off-center. This one, she says, is a mystery. You wait. No one remembers what it meant. You touch it gently. The wool is smoother than the others. The knot simple but tight, too tight to untie. You imagine someone tying it 100 years ago, their hands rough, their mind full of something too large to say out loud. So we just keep it? She nods, until someone understands that you realize is the final layer of this memory system. Faith. Faith that something forgotten will someday be remembered again. Not because it was written in ink, but because someone's hand will know what it feels like. The sun slips below the ridge, and the wind picks up, tugging at the cords like a curious child. You help her roll them up again. Each movement feels sacred, final, eternal. And as you do, something shifts inside you. You're not thinking about sheep anymore. You're thinking about your own memories. The ones no phone has captured. The ones that live only in the way your mother tied your scarf. The shape of your grandfather's walk. The silence before a thunderstorm that changed your life. You wonder what would your life look like if it were spun in wool. Would someone else someday trace their fingers along the cords you leave behind and know you? Maybe, if they listen. As you return down the slope, she says softly, the flock forgets nothing. It's just waiting for the right hands to feel it again. By now, your boots know the path better than your mind does. They carry you automatically over the narrow ridges, across the slick moss stones, through the silent fog that wraps around the flock like a second layer of wool. You don't lead anymore. You don't follow either. You move with a third position that somehow feels more ancient than both. But today, something changes. The herder stops in the middle of the trail. No words, no signal. She just stops and lifts her hand. You freeze too. Then she points not at a sheep, but at the ground. There, etched faintly into the stony soil, is a shape, long curved with jagged little offshoots on either side. You'd almost miss it if you weren't walking like you belong to the mountain now. What is it, you whisper? A path, she says, but not for us. She steps aside and gestures for you to look from above, and suddenly the shape makes sense. It's a puma, you murmur. She nods. They used to walk this way. The animals still remember. This isn't symbolic. It's spatial. You've stumbled into a practice that once shaped entire migration's sacred geography, where people moved their flocks not just according to pasture, but according to animal-shaped constellations carved into the landscape. Historians still argue over the concept. Some claim that the Inca and pre-Inca peoples mapped sacred animals onto the land the same way they mapped them into the stars. That valleys became serpents' ridgelines, formed condors' river paths, echoed jaguars. Others dismiss it as coincidence or the result of storytelling applied after the fact. But here it doesn't feel like theory. It feels like invitation. The herder traces the puma's spine with her staff. We're in its back, she says. If you walk the tail on a bad day, the flock will scatter. You don't ask how she knows. You just believe her. She shows you more signs, a stack of stones shaped like a paw print, A patch of twisted grass, they say, matches the puma's ribcage, a spot where the ground always seems warmer even in the frost. These aren't waypoints, they're organs. The landscape is alive, and the flock walks through its body. You continue along the path, moving with new reverence. The sheep don't hesitate. They seem to know. Their movement shifts, falls into alignment with the curves of the land, like they're not walking across it, but within it, like they remember a map no one's seen in centuries. One quirky note: some communities mark solstices by walking the full shape of these animal geographies, a day-long journey tracing the spine of a mythical creature made real in mountains and valleys. Along the way, they stop to leave offerings, not because they expect something in return, but because gratitude itself is a form of memory. You reach a bend in the trail where the wind picks up sharply. The herder pauses. "This is the puma's mouth," she says. "Speak truth here or not at all." She taps her staff on the ground and then walks forward. You hesitate. You think about your journey, the numbers you left behind, the questions you brought, the knots you've tied in the past few weeks, not just in wool, but in understanding. So you speak, softly. "I didn't come here to count sheep." The wind doesn't answer, but the silence settles, like something has heard you. And when you reach the flat ledge overlooking the valley, the herder stops again. "This is the puma's eye," she whispers. "It sees what we forget." From here, the landscape unfolds. Terraces like scales, stone fences curling like claws, and at the center, the flock, unaware, unbothered, but perfectly in shape. You watch, breath-catching as they move, not randomly, but in rhythm with the land, like the puma is walking again, and you are inside its memory. You feel something ancient move through you. Not magic, not belief, just knowing that there are ways of remembering older than words, in paths shaped by animals that never needed to be counted to be sacred. That night, the moon is swollen and golden, so full it seems to tug at the landscape itself. You lie on your back beside the herder's hut, your head nestled into a saddle blanket that smells faintly of toasted grass and sheep sweat. The stars are dim by comparison, but the moon commands. You're not the only one watching. The herder is still awake, sitting cross-legged near the fire, weaving by moonlight. Not for warmth, for calibration. "Tonight," she says softly, "the sheep will tell us more than usual." You raise an eyebrow. "Because of the moon?" She nods. They always do. She isn't being poetic. In her world, the moon isn't just a calendar, it's a diagnostic tool. A full moon like this one, it reflects everything from hoof rot to hidden pregnancies to flock harmony itself. They cast longer shadows when something's wrong, she explains, gesturing at the animals curled below. And if the shadow bends over the left side, sickness. If they blink more than usual, pregnancy. If they sleep too far apart, grudges, you guess. She smirks. Maybe. And so you both watch. At first, nothing seems unusual. The animals breathe in rhythm. Their forms darken gently in the moonlight, each one a puddle of motionless wool. Then one stirs. The youngest lamb, barely a month old, rises, turns once, then lies back down. Only instead of rejoining her sibling, she turns away, facing the mountain. The herder frowns. That's not her pattern, she says, and just like that, the tone changes. The watching becomes sharper, focused, intent. The moon isn't just illumination, it's a lens, a way of seeing behavior differently with shadows, gestures, and motion taking center stage. Historians still debate whether this practice moon diagnosis, as some call it, was widespread or local folklore. Some argue it was superstition. Others think it was an early form of ethological observation grounded in generations of behavioral knowledge. There's no consensus, but the results speak for themselves. The herder moves through the flock with the quiet grace of someone who's done this 1,000 times. She doesn't disturb them. She doesn't whistle or click. She watches, measures spacing, counts, blinks, notes which side of the body each sheep sleeps on. When she returns, she sits beside you again. "She's fine," she says, smiling. "Just too much chicha in her milk." You laugh, startled. "Seriously." She shrugs. "The ewe raided my cousin's mash bucket this morning. You can't make this stuff up. And yet you believe it. Because out here, everything leaves a trace, and the moon helps you see it. One quirky belief, still whispered in some villages, that if you look at a sheep's reflection in moonlit water and it blinks twice, someone in your family will soon fall in love. Blink 3 times, someone's going to move away. Blink 4, a lamb is coming. No one's sure where this originated, but like most things here, it's not about certainty. It's about attention. That's what the moon demands. Not answers, observation, stillness, reflection. And as the hours pass, the flock barely moves again. You memorize the way they've settled the distance between hooves, the curls of their bodies. It occurs to you that this isn't just about seeing. It's about being seen by the moon, by the flock, by the land. You feel exposed and comforted at the same time. The herder passes you a piece of yarn, pale, almost silver in the moonlight. "Twist it," she says, "so you remember this night." You do. And the cord becomes more than fiber. It becomes the record of this moment, of the lamb who blinked 3 times, of the ewe with fermented milk, of the way the puma path seemed to curve under moonlight like it was alive again. You tie the cord around your wrist beside the green and the purple from days before. Each knot a whisper, each thread a line in a song you now know by heart. The sheep shuffle once more, and then silence reigns again. And under that vast glowing moon, you begin to wonder if memory lives in thread, in shape, in rhythm. Maybe the moon itself is just another quipu pulled tight across the sky, waiting for you to feel the knots. The morning is dry and startlingly clear. No mist, no wind, no chill, just the kind of hard blue sky that makes the world feel both impossibly vast and intimately near, the kind of day that demands movement. You're halfway through your usual circuit when you notice something strange. The flock is intact, the rhythm is right, the path is familiar, and yet the herder doesn't look concerned. She looks still, like she's waiting for something. "What is it?" you ask. "They're gone," she says simply. Your heart skips. "Who?" She points to the ridge. "No one." You scan the area. Everyone's there. Every sheep, every alpaca, even the scrappy goat who insists on stealing moss from the others. The formation's perfect. There's no sound of distress. But she's right. There's an absence, a hollowness in the movement. "They're walking without purpose," she says. Something is missing. Not someone, just something. You try to process that. How do you know when nothing is missing and yet everything is wrong? So you walk, not away, not in search of anything, but around, in spirals, loops, repetition. It's not investigation, it's invocation. You're calling the rhythm back. And then after the 4th loop, it clicks. No one has sung today. No humming, no whistles, no quiet recitations. The entire flock has moved in silence, and that silence has made the whole system shudder, like a building missing a load-bearing wall. The herder nods. They noticed before we did. You realize she's right. The spiral was loose, the younger ones were restless, even the hooves were quieter than usual. "Why didn't we sing?" She shrugs. "Some days the song forgets you." It's a strange thought. But as you stand there, surrounded by a flock that is perfectly accounted for and completely disoriented, it feels true. This is the flip side of memory not loss, but pause. The moment when a ritual doesn't happen and you feel its absence more than you'd feel a missing object. The same way you notice a heartbeat only when it skips. One fringe tradition she tells you about, sometimes when a community member dies, the flock senses it before the people speak it, not because they understand, but because a rhythm is gone. In these moments, herders walk in silence with the animals until one of them makes the first sound. That's the permission to grieve, the return of the song. So you wait, not impatiently, not fearfully, just patiently. And then it happens. A single note, hummed, soft, from the oldest sheep in the group Chintu. It's barely a sound, more vibration than voice, but it reverberates through the animals, through the ground, through you. And in that moment, the shape of the flock shifts back, tightens, breathes. You don't resume walking. You don't need to. Because now the movement means something again. You sit with the herder's shoulders brushing. "That was it," you ask. "Just a missing song." She chuckles. "Nothing just is. Not even a pause." You take out your cord, the one you've been weaving over the past few weeks. You hadn't added anything for days. You weren't sure what came next. Now you do. You tie a loose knot soft round incomplete. "What's that for?" she asks. "For the day the song forgot us." She nods, and found its way back. You tuck the cord away. You won't need to look at it to remember. You'll feel it every time the silence starts to stretch. Because now you understand not all memory is loud. Not all absence is tragedy. Sometimes the flock walks itself. And when it loses the song, it listens harder. And when the song returns, so does the world. It begins with a dream. Not yours, hers. You wake to the sound of footsteps crunching gravel and the low creak of a door you didn't hear open. The herder is already outside, barefoot still in her sleeping tunic. She's standing at the edge of the pasture, staring at the stars. You shuffle over, rubbing sleep from your eyes. "Is everything okay?" She nods, but she doesn't take her eyes off the sheep. "They spoke to me," she says. You wait for her to go on. She doesn't. Instead, she walks straight into the flock, not around the edge, through it. Hands out, brushing backs, touching ears, whispering names. It's not frantic, not a search. It's a check-in. You follow. One by one, she touches each animal. Some flinch. Some lean into her hand like it's a familiar prayer. Others remain still, but their breathing shifts slower, more measured. "I dreamed of hooves," she murmurs. "Too many, then not enough." You don't laugh. Not here, not now. Because here, dreams aren't private. They're part of the memory system. Another thread in the communal weave. You've learned by now the flock isn't just a group of animals. It's a mirror. And some mornings, that mirror reflects more than hunger or weather. It reflects what's coming. She pauses beside the smallest lamb, taps her finger against its chest. This one was bleeding in the dream. You look, nothing visible. No limp, no signs of injury. But she marks its leg with a thread of dark wool. Just in case. This is normal, apparently. In many Andean communities, dreams are treated as information. Not prophecy, not superstition, just another form of memory. Something your body remembers before your conscious mind does. Some scholars call this dream cognition. Others dismiss it. But here, on this mountainside, you see how useful it can be. One quirky detail she shares: some herders sleep beside the flock on full moons, believing that proximity strengthens the dreaming bond. Others place pebbles under their tongues to carry the dreams down the throat so they can speak them clearly in the morning. You sit with her as she finishes the check. "So far, you ask?" She shakes her head. "Not sure." "Do you ever dream something that doesn't come true?" "All the time." She turns to you. "That's not the point." You blink. "Then what is—" She squats beside a ewe who's snoring very softly. "The dream tells me what to pay attention to. Whether it happens or not, it makes me notice." You nod slowly, because suddenly that makes perfect sense. Dreams aren't predictions. They're filters. They help the brain decide which sounds to hear louder, which sheep to check more closely, which thread to tug on in the cord of the day. She hands you a coil of yarn and a knife. Choose one. You point, a soft yellow. She nods. "That's for the sheep who'll move first today." You tie the thread around a sheep's leg, not knowing why, but trusting the action anyway. The flock begins to stir. You watch the one you marked. It moves first. No limp, no hesitation. Just first. She laughs gently when she sees it. "Looks like your dream reached you too. You hadn't thought about what you dreamed, but now you remember a rush of color, movement, something gold pushing forward. Maybe that meant something. Maybe it didn't. But the thread around that leg says you noticed." The sun rises slowly. The rest of the flock follows. And as the path unfolds before you, you wonder if maybe memory doesn't always have to come from you. Maybe it can pass through you instead, like a dream you didn't know you were having until the world confirmed it. By now, the flock knows your footsteps. They don't startle when you walk near. They barely lift their heads. And when you sit down quietly, the way the herder taught you, they drift toward you like fog pulled by gravity. You've become part of the shape. Today, you're trailing behind the group as they wind along a narrow ridge. The air is still. The light is soft. The mountain is listening. And so is he, the child. You spot him for the first time just past the ridge's bend, seated cross-legged on a flat stone, watching the sheep with wide, serious eyes. He couldn't be older than 7, thin as a stalk of maize, with a dark red cap pulled down to his ears. The herder nods toward him. "My nephew." He doesn't speak when you approach, just keeps watching the flock like he's waiting for them to reveal a secret. "He's learning," she whispers, "but he'll never count." You raise an eyebrow. "He's never been taught numbers," she continues. "And we won't start now." You blink. "At all. No need. He already sees what matters." You sit beside him and follow his gaze. The sheep are moving in a loose arc, grazing slowly. The young ones push forward. The older ones lag behind. A hawk circles far above, unnoticed by most, but not by him. He taps his toe 3 times against the rock. "Warning," he says softly. Sure enough, the hawk's shadow ripples across the field moments later, and 2 lambs huddle closer together. He saw it coming. He didn't calculate it, didn't time the sweep, didn't measure flight speed. He just knew. One fringe theory among Andean scholars. Some communities intentionally withheld formal numeracy to protect other cognitive skills, pattern detection, relational awareness, kinesthetic memory. Not from ignorance, but from a belief that numbers could dull other senses. Whether true or not, children like this nephew become case studies in what the brain can do without counting. The boy picks up a stone, smooth, flat. He places it beside another, then two more, then one a little farther off. "What's that, you ask?" "Lunas," he says. "Moons." He nods. "Of the sheep." Another nod. "You're not sure what that means, but it feels right." The herder leans in. He arranges their rest. He knows who needs shade, who prefers to lie near the breeze. The boy begins humming a soft three-note pattern. One of the older alpacas turns her head and begins walking. She knows that song the herder murmurs. This is more than mimicry, it's fluency. The boy can't tell you how many sheep there are, but he knows who they are, what they like, how they move, when something's off. He's memorized the flock like a living map, and he's doing it through instinct rhythm and touch. No numbers needed. You wonder what this boy would be like in a classroom. Would they think he's behind? Would they tell him to count? Would they erase the shape he sees just to teach him digits? You shudder, because now you know better. He watches the flock for hours, never bored, never fidgeting. His eyes track movements so small you'd miss them the slight shift of a shoulder blade, the way a tail flicks the length of time one hoof stays grounded. "He'll lead soon," the herder says. He's nearly ready. You glance at the boy. What else does he need to learn? She shakes her head. Nothing. We just need to trust him. And that's the heart of it. This isn't about what he lacks. It's about what you're willing to believe exists without the framework of numbers. The boy places another stone beside his growing lunar map. Then he looks at you, tilts his head, and says, "That one's going to give birth tonight." You follow his gaze. Around you, lying down slower than usual, breathing just a little deeper. You have no reason to doubt him. Because sometimes the ones who never count are the ones who understand everything. You're not ready for what happens next. Not because it's dramatic. There's no storm, no jaguar, no mysterious vanishing into fog. It's simple. The Spaniards arrive. Not in full military regalia, not on horseback with banners and drums. Just two men on foot, dusty boots, ink-stained fingers. One carries a ledger, the other a quill. And for a moment, everything freezes. You see it ripple through the flock ears, twitch heads, lift movement slows. Even the wind seems to hesitate. The herder straightens her spine. Visitors. But her voice is flat. Not welcoming, not angry, guarded. They approach casually nodding to the herder, glancing at the sheep already preparing to open the ledger. How many, one asks without preamble. The herder smiles slightly. Enough. He doesn't like that. Be precise, he says. The crown requires numbers. You see her jaw flex. She gestures to the flock. You're welcome to count. The man frowns. It's your flock. She shrugs. Then I already know. The exchange is brief, tense. The man with the quill begins writing anyway, drawing lines in his book as though precision can be declared into existence. You stand quietly to the side, heart thudding in your chest. Because you realize something, this is the moment the old system starts to fade. Not because it failed, but because it didn't fit into boxes. The Spaniards don't ask about rhythms. They don't care about the spiral. They don't want to feel knots in a cord or touch a wool thread woven to remember a drought. They want tallies, lists, figures, ledgers that can travel back to governors and kings. And so, the herder stands there watching as her entire flock, her memory is reduced to marks on a page. One quirky historical fact, during the early colonial period, Spanish officials often misunderstood or dismissed indigenous record-keeping like quipus. Some considered them pagan tools. Others simply deemed them unreadable and therefore irrelevant. In some regions, they were even burned. You've seen one, held one. You want to scream, but you don't, because you watch the herder instead. She doesn't argue, she doesn't beg, she doesn't try to explain. She simply does what her people have always done, remembers differently. When the men finally leave after jotting down numbers, they likely miscounted, ignoring every nuance of behavior pattern and flock dynamics. She walks slowly to a flat rock and pulls out a cord. A new one. It's gray and gold coarse and fresh, the knots still soft from weaving. She ties 3 quick loops and whispers, "This is for today." For the sheep, you ask. She shakes her head. For the interruption. That's what it was after all. Not a catastrophe. An interruption in the weave, a tangle in the pattern, and just like that, she smooths it back into place. We'll remember their count, she says. They'll forget ours. It's not bitterness. It's clarity. The flock begins to move again. The spiral reforms. The tension melts. And beneath your feet, the path continues. She walks beside you calm and grounded. They'll come back, she says. You ask, will you change how you do things? No, she replies simply, but I will teach faster. You glance down at your wrist threads in green, silver, purple, gold, each one a memory not captured in any book. You feel something swell in your chest, not grief. Defiance. The herder passes you a fresh strand of wool. You should start a new cord. You take it. You don't need to ask what for. Because today, something shifted, and you won't let them be the only ones who recorded it. That evening, the fire burns lower than usual. There's no singing, no humming, no sheep lullabies echoing into the dark. Just the slow scratch of wool on wool as the herder weaves with a rhythm as steady as breathing. You sit beside her, not speaking, running your fingers along the new cord you started after the Spaniards left. It's still short, just a few twists, one knot, a bit of loose fringe you haven't trimmed yet. But it feels heavy, like it's holding more than just memory. She reaches into her pouch and pulls out another cord, older, faded, frayed at the ends. This was the last one I made before the soldiers came the first time. You take it carefully. It's nearly silent in your hands. No bright colors, no bold knots, just gray, the color of cloud shadow over stone. You turn to her. What does it mean? She taps one spot gently. This is where I buried the old quipu just before they came. I didn't want them to take it. Or burn it. You ask, did you ever dig it back up? She shakes her head. I don't need to. I remember it. That's the thing about these herders. They don't resist with swords or slogans. They resist with quiet memory, with cords that survive underground, with tassels tucked into the hems of cloaks, with songs sung so softly the wind thinks their sighs. One story she tells you later, just before bed, there was once a woman who memorized an entire village's tax obligations in her body. She wore her sash in different directions depending on who owed what. A red tie near her shoulder meant one clan had given wool. A green knot at her hip meant another owed corn. She never spoke it aloud, never wrote it down. She just wore the village's economy walking through town like a silent ledger. She disappeared one winter, the herder says. But the village still knew who owed what, because they remembered her shape. You stare into the flames, your cord coiled in your lap like a sleeping animal. What happens if we forget, you ask? She doesn't answer immediately. Instead, she pokes at the fire and says, we don't. You look at her. We can't, she continues, because the remembering isn't in us. It's around us, in the sheep, in the wind, in the wool. She hands you a spindle and some raw fleece. Spin while you talk, she says. It helps the memory stick. You do. As the spindle turns, you recount your day, not like a list, but like a shape. You speak of the way the flock gathered near the cliffside, how two lambs moved in sync without looking, how the dust from the soldiers' boots smelled like tin and loss. The herder nods, eyes closed, as if threading your words into her own cord silently. And then she speaks slowly, evenly. The soldiers came for numbers. But they'll never have what matters. You glance down at your spindle. It's full now. One long strand. Your memory unfolded, untangled, spoken, spun. And it didn't need to be measured, just made. One quirky practice. Some families keep a cord of silence, a strand of undyed wool with no knots, no color, no shape. It's meant to hold the things they choose, not to say the memories too sacred or painful to speak aloud. Not as a secret, but as a safeguard. Something to pass down when the words have worn out. You ask if she has one. She doesn't answer. But later that night, you see her adding a twist to a cord with no color and no end. And, as the fire dies, you curl up beneath your blanket and listen to the soft sounds of the flock settling. They aren't counting. They aren't afraid. They're remembering too. Not the soldiers, not the books, but the shape of the earth beneath them, the hands that spun them into story. And the promise now tied around your wrist that someone will always remember what others try to erase. You don't wake up in the usual way. No rooster, no breeze tugging at the tent flap, no sheep bleating just loud enough to be annoying. You wake because the herder is humming, not the lullaby hum from before. This one is sharper, purposeful. It cuts the silence like a thread sliding through wool. You sit up, rubbing your eyes. "What's happening?" She doesn't answer. She's weaving, not slowly, urgently. Her fingers blur tugging fibers into shapes faster than you've ever seen. The rhythm is off, not elegant, but insistent, like she's chasing something before it gets away. "They're forgetting," she says under her breath. You blink. "Who is?" She stops, looks up at you with eyes that feel like thunderclouds. "Not the sheep." You feel the chill hit your spine. You step outside and see it. The flock is fine, quiet, grazing. But the path, the spiral is wrong. Not broken, just shifted. The flow has changed ever so slightly. It curls too tightly to the left. The sheep pause too long before turning. The rhythm stutters. The flock is forgetting the shape. The herder walks among them, singing softly, her voice catching in the morning air. The older animals respond, repositioning slightly. But the younger ones, they hesitate. "The memory is thinning," she says. You don't understand at first. Then you see they've stopped spinning new chords. The last few nights, the boy, the nephew, hadn't gathered stones. No new knots, no new threads. The rhythm hasn't been passed, and the herder knows it. Memory is motion, she says, and motion requires transmission, so you begin to help. She shows you how to sing the bends into the trail, how to draw the curve of the spiral with your walking stick, how to whisper each elder sheep's name as you pass them, not for the sheep, but for the watchers, the children, the next pair of hands. One quirky tradition: in some villages, the young ones aren't taught through instruction, but by shadowing. Literally, they walk in their elder's shadow until they've memorized its shape. If the shadow curves left, so do they. If it lifts its staff at a bend, they mark that moment not with thought, but with muscle. You find the boy again, the dreamer, sitting on a boulder, silent, still, watching. But his stones are scattered this time, not placed, not arranged. You sit beside him. "It's slipping," you say. He nods. "I don't want to forget," he says quietly. "Then help me remember." Together you stand. You walk. You sing the bends. You place his hand on the ewe that needs the song, first the one who remembers longest. And slowly, like grass unbending after a heavy footstep, the rhythm returns. The spiral loosens. The sheep shift. The pattern rethreads itself, not because of the herder alone, but because you helped, because he helped, because the memory needed more than one weaver. Back at camp, the herder finishes her urgent cord. She doesn't hang it or bury it. She hands it to the boy. "For your wrist," she says. He takes it, wraps it, and something clicks in his posture. The shape is remembered. The forgetting is undone. You sit in the shadow of the flock breath, steady eyes soft. The rhythm holds, and you realize memory isn't permanent. It's maintenance. And every day you decide whether to let it fray or help reweave it. The end doesn't arrive with a fanfare. It comes like a soft footstep in the wool, like the hush just before dusk, like the way your own breathing slows when you've done something well and know it. You rise before dawn without needing to be nudged. The herder is already waiting at the edge of the ridge, a small bundle in her hands. The boy stands beside her, not speaking, his eyes wide and clear. "You're leaving soon," she says, her voice gentler than you've ever heard it. You don't answer, not because you disagree, but because you feel it too. Your journey here was supposed to be temporary, a visit, a curiosity, a break from the world of blinking cursors, tapped calculators, and neatly numbered spreadsheets. Now those things feel like fiction. Here nothing was counted, but everything was remembered. She hands you the bundle. You open it slowly. Inside are the cords you've woven, green, gold, silver, gray, some with knots, some without. One is barely started. "Take them," she says, "but don't keep them." You look at her. Add to them, pass them, tangle them up in someone else's rhythm. The boy steps forward and gives you one last cord, his own. It's knotted with tiny pebbles, a whisper of the spiral you rebuilt together. You tie it to yours. It feels right, and then you lead the flock one last time. You don't even think about it. Your body just moves. You whistle at the right turns. You click your tongue at the descent. The older sheep follow first. The younger ones match your gait. You form the spiral. No counting, just rhythm. The herder stands at the edge of the field, arms folded, a wry smile on her face. "You won't last long in your old world," she says. "Why not?" She gestures to your hands. "Because now you'll see the shapes and things, and they won't let you forget." One mainstream historical fact: though modern systems gradually replaced indigenous memory practices like quipus, some rural herders continued using thread-based memory methods well into the 20th century, especially for tracking animals' weather and family agreements. These systems endured because they were felt, not just taught. You look at the spiral one more time. The sheep settle, the earth exhales, and you know you're ready, not to leave everything behind, but to carry it differently. You walk back slowly, no fanfare, just wool brushing against your legs, cords brushing against your wrist, and the soft song of a boy humming behind you. Memory has changed you. Now it's your turn to change someone else. And now we breathe. Let your body sink just a little deeper into the sheets. Let your shoulders go slack, your jaw unclench, and your breath slow, not forced, just gentle, like a sheep curling into straw after a long walk. You've walked a long way tonight. You've followed paths that were never written down, felt rhythms in the dirt, seen memory woven not in numbers or ink, but in wool and breath, and the silent steps of a flock that remembers everything. You've watched patterns flicker and return. You've felt the weight of history in the quiet hum of the wind. And maybe now the world outside your window feels a little softer, a little rounder, a little less like something to tally, and more like something to notice. It's okay if you don't remember every detail. That's not how memory works out here. The spiral doesn't demand perfection, just presence. So close your eyes if they're not closed already. Let the night settle over you like a wool blanket, thick with stories, warm with shape. Maybe tomorrow you'll notice a rhythm in the crowd, or a pause in the wind, or the way your own breath falls into step with someone else's. And maybe you'll remember the spiral, the rhythm, the quiet wisdom of sheep. Sleep well, gentle dreamer. You've counted everything that matters.